Now it's time for questions. We're going to break at 11:30, so fire away. We put you to sleep. Uh-oh. Go.
I have a question for Bill. In the concept of smart cities, does that really require a tabula rasa city? And because I remember Bill, Chris, and Larry came to us, Scientific American, to do that article before they did the book. And the editorial board, who are very, greeny kind of people, looked at this and said, well, this is for China and India, not for us, and we couldn't sell the article. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. The question being, if to build the new smart, sustainable city, do we need essentially to start from scratch, a greenfield versus retrofit? No doubt it's easier to build the pipes, the ditches, the infrastructures, and go from the ground up than it is to renovate. But I think the template, the strategy is roughly the same. The numbers are different in terms of the business models, but the strategies, the techniques are really quite similar. So my sort of hope or belief is that we can learn from the Koreas, the Chinese, the Indians, the new cities that are popping up at incredible speed, and essentially retrofit those models for new city or new urban development to what we have here today. In fact, the bulk of the stimulus dollars that are available in the development construction arena are, of course, most of, not all of them, directed toward retrofit. So what we've had in the last 12 months is a stimulus policy that is encouraging creative thinking among developers, policymakers, for precisely these sorts of retrofits. What we don't yet have are the successful applications in a new context to really take the method, a kit of parts. We'll see that development roughly over the next decade.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, sure.
Bill's concept seemed to be, basically these very light, smart little cars in the city. You go to the outskirts of town, you get your real car or whatever.
He's talking about the last mile. Bill Mitchell's focused on the last mile.
But the question is that a retrofittable concept to an existing city, I guess?
Yeah. It's really tough. I advise a company called Intrigo, based in Boulder, which has tried to develop a business model not unlike what Mitchell and company are talking about in the book. Well, it's much the same problem that A Better Place is facing. But A Better Place is far better funded, and when you've got Kleiner Perkins and others behind you, the leverage politically becomes a little stronger. So yeah, I mean, these are sort of Herculean challenges. How do you build the infrastructure that enable this more integrated, more networked system of goods and services in our places? I don't have a simple answer, or I do actually. The simple answer was we should have taken roughly $1 trillion about a year, 18 months ago, and said we are committed to a Marshall Plan for new infrastructure. What gives me hope is that we've seen, just in the last few years, the rise of a number of essentially advocacy organizations like America 2050, backed by powerful interests and thoughtful policymakers who really do think that infrastructure is the new great hope for reinventing the way we live and indeed for creating value.
Follow-up question, new question, different question. I'll ask as a follow-up to this to say, when our institute sits down with the companies like General Electric and Siemens and the big constructors like AECOM and the engineering companies who are going to be doing the infrastructure, they say that both the greenfield and the retrofit of sustainable cities is doable. The challenge is the financing, and the issue is not where is the credit capacity in the banking system, it's where is the political momentum to motivate banks to perhaps provide through a national infrastructure bank, which is being proposed by Earl Blumenauer and others on the Hill, to be able to have the mix of public and private resources that will make it feasible for the cities and counties to step up with their piece of it, the developers to step up with their piece of it, and the infrastructure builders and equipment providers to step up with their piece of it. It's a complex ecosystem of relationships. It's happening in Masdar and places like that on a greenfield because it is a tabula rasa, and it is easier when you have no pre-existing history and baggage to deal with, and it also helps when you have a government that's got a couple of $100 billion in a sovereign wealth fund. But Masdar is not the only example. Yes. And then over here, Jana, right in front of you. Yeah.
I'm just old enough to remember when science was actually going to be a force for improving our lives. And I guess at sort of a meta level, I'm curious about the question of what it takes or how to get this nation to the point where big changes and even small changes are not reflexively fought. I live in a city, New York, that's changed quite a lot over the past 400 years, and yet getting anything at all done there is more difficult now than ever before. Given the built environment in this country, 50 years of post-war suburbs, how do we go about radically changing this stuff where it doesn't just get fought at any level because any change is going to be worse than whatever deficient thing we have now?
Start with Bill, and then we'll go around and see if there are comments. Bill?
Sure. Well, I ran a foundation for several years whose principal investment was a technology called CommunityViz, based on the SimCity model, but based on the hypothesis that if you present people with very visually compelling images and data, that they will change their minds vis-a-vis development. It was a flawed hypothesis, and we tested it in many, many different settings.
He's not at the foundation anymore.
No, exactly. But here's the takeaway. It sounds perhaps grandiose to state, but I think we are in a moment where this technology is beginning to evolve quite dramatically, and there's data, there's evidence from the cognitive sciences that we're beginning, in a sense, to move from what's largely been the fight, flight, let's call it primitive brain, to something more evolved. And technology, in fact, is accelerating that pace. The more we see the 3D, the more we're able to fly over and through places on the globe and 30,000 feet above. That is influencing the way we think, and indeed is becoming encoded chemically in the makeup of our brains. So whether that means, tomorrow you'll be able to develop the low-income housing development on the Upper West Side next to the, yuppie tower, I cannot guarantee. But my sense is that over the next many decades, we'll begin to see a different way in which people make collective decisions. And I think, technology will have something to do with that. But it ain't happening anytime soon, or isn't coming to a neighborhood near you tomorrow.
Frank, will a carbon tax push us in the direction of making big decisions?
Well, I guess my characterization would be is markets work at light speed, political processes work at glacial speed. That's the nature of each of them. I think that it's difficult to cause that change to occur. For that reason, I guess I view it as is if we, the other is, I guess my view would be is if people like to live in suburbs, then they're going to live in suburbs. And the only issue I would say is we want to make sure that they bear the full cost of living in those suburbs in terms of the cars that they drive, the mileage, the roads that are necessary to support them, as well as the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions they produce to effectively drive that distance, or the congestion that they cause as a result of that. And I think of it as that's where you're going to get the change in terms of trying to, if you like, price more of the unpriced goods that people see, and adaptation will take place extremely fast. I mean, the simplest example I can always think of there is look at Silicon Valley. The price mechanism and the market mechanism just makes that place move at rocket speed.